Strange Michigan Weather by Dennis M. Morrison and David Paul Israel-Morrison. Introduction. Everyone jokes about how quickly Michigan's weather changes, and most of these jokes are indeed true. You can never really be certain from moment to moment what is in store next. There have been many times here in Michigan where the weather has gotten just downright freakish. Consider the following. Was there ever a hurricane on the Great Lakes? What caused the sky to open up like a raging furnace years ago? Yes, Michigan weather is strange, and I think you'll enjoy this compendium of some of the more oddities that have been recorded over the years. Let's begin with the Huron. I want to begin with what I believe is one of Michigan's most enigmatic storms. Actually, my stepson David brought the background information on this event to my attention. At first, I thought he was kidding. A hurricane in Michigan? I didn't believe it. Well, guess what? It isn't supposed to happen, but David was right. It did. The story takes place from September 11th through the 15th of 1996. Let's look at this storm that, while it is not particularly destructive, it was highly out of the ordinary. The storm in question formed over the Great Lakes at what is the height of the tropical storm season. The storm began as a typical cold core 500 millibar low-pressure system, and later, after settling in over the Great Lakes' relatively warm waters, developed into a warm core system, in particular over Lake Huron. Oddly, the low-pressure system had moved past Lake Huron, but was drawn back over the warm waters. Similar to the tropics, the Great Lakes usually reach their warmest temperatures from August to mid-September. The storm began to deepen and intensify at lower levels of the atmosphere rather than higher, which would have been typical. It is generally accepted that the warm waters of Lake Huron, as well as low-level instability over the lake, were major contributing factors in the evolution of this highly unusual storm. The storm continued to develop quite strangely. It formed a very broad cyclonic circulation which included the spiral bands and eye typically seen in hurricanes. The image which I have attached here is a satellite photograph of the Huron, and as you can see, it looks like a typical hurricane. At one point, the cyclone produced tropical storm force winds clocking at 39 to 73 miles per hour. Some of the spiral bands had rainfall exceeding 4 inches, which resulted in some flooding. Termed the Huron, the strange storm reached its maximum intensity during the day of September 14th when a central pressure of 29.34 inches was recorded in the late morning by a buoy that was by luck positioned at one point directly in the eye. The eye, by the way, measured close to 20 miles across and had a ring of convective clouds surrounding it which resembled the eye wall of a tropical hurricane. Not only that, but the convective showers that circled the eye reached out for 300 miles. As the eye moved over the buoy that I mentioned before, the surface wind was close to 35 miles per hour, and as the eye passed over it, it dropped to 10 miles per hour. After passing over the buoy, the winds for a brief period came to the tropical storm force. This is exactly what would be expected in a tropical hurricane. The air temperature rose from 55 degrees in the spiral shower bands to 64 degrees, also being the lake temperature in the clearing above the eye. The storm weakened during the night due to the lake temperatures dropping, and so soon the enigma was over. A hurricane on Lake Huron? Well, it was not named as tropical storms are because it did not meet the definition, which is as follows. A severe tropical cyclone with maximum 1-minute sustained surface winds, speed greater than 74 miles per hour in the North Atlantic, Caribbean, Caribbean Sea, Gulf of Mexico, and the eastern North Pacific off the west coast of Mexico to the international dateline. By that criteria, the Huron was not a hurricane at all, but for all intents and purposes, that is exactly what it was, and probably the only one to have occurred in the Great Lakes, most definitely in historic times. 1941 produces a very unusual storm. In 1941, the world was wrapped up in the nightmare of World War II. In September of that year, Michigan was visited by the remnants of a hurricane that was a storm of astounding nature. On September 17th, a tropical storm formed over the eastern Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Florida. It moved west across the Gulf, stopped, and made a loop in its tracks south of New Orleans. By that time, it had reached hurricane status and actually intensified into a Category 3 storm with winds of 111 to 130 miles per hour. While offshore, its path changed to make its landfall target Texas. On the 23rd, near Freeport, Texas, with winds of 110 miles per hour, it made landfall and then quickly weakened it to a Category 1, and by the time the storm reached Houston, wind gusts had dropped to 75 miles per hour. Damage was extensive from the storm. Then it tore on northward through Texas, and now the story becomes more interesting and peculiar as it tracked through the Mississippi Valley and into the Great Lakes. It covered close to 1,000 miles in just a 24-hour period, which was rather astounding. The forward movement of the hurricane's remnants averaged 40 to 45 miles per hour as it approached southern lower Michigan. Entering into the Great Lakes region, it hooked up with a strong cold front that pushed across the upper Midwest and into the lakes. The combination of the strong push of cool fall air, strong upper-level dynamics, and the remnants of the hurricane created a powerful storm. The speed of this system was fairly quick, and this is not unusual. What is, however, were the accompanying wind speeds. Hurricanes making it this far north have usually blown themselves out with maximum gusts of 30 to 40 miles an hour. This following is from the Detroit weather records of September 25, 1941, and I quote, "An intense tropical cyclone moving up from the Gulf through eastern Texas along the Mississippi Valley and thence across Illinois and west and northwest of Detroit with gale force winds gust to 65 miles per hour from 10:18 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. and gusts to 75 miles per hour from 12:30 p.m. till 2:30 p.m." Unquote. There were some unusual occurrences as a result of this storm. The following is from the Detroit Free Press of September 26, 1941, and again I quote, "There were many freakish effects of the wind, including barring of the Detroit River middle grounds off Belle Isle when water was backed into Lake St. Clair. The southwest gale literally blew the water out of the Detroit River, reducing its level by 3 feet and leaving hundreds of pleasure craft high and dry on the muddy bottom. Several yachts broke their own mooring and were heeled over at the Detroit Yacht Club. Another odd effect was the noticeable swaying of downtown skyscrapers as the full force of the gale struck. Office employees who left tall downtown buildings were later reassured by engineers. Shortly after noon, the wind blew steadily at 56 miles an hour, but at times gusts reached hurricane velocity of 25 miles per hour." End quote. The report went on to say that dozens had been hurt by falling glass from windows blown out or debris tossed by the wind. One woman was blown into a fire hydrant, suffering a skull fracture. The strong winds churned up the giant waves of the lakes, including Lake Huron and the St. Clair River, where 2 barges were blown ashore even after having dropped their heaviest anchors. As a result, downed telephone lines caused a disruption of service and communications across the Great Lakes and Canada. What an extraordinary event that even after weakening and becoming subtropical and having traveled over 1,000 miles, that it maintained such awesome high wind speeds. As the storm moved into southern lower Michigan, its center tracked northeast across Battle Creek, Lansing, Saginaw, and then out into Lake Huron and into Ontario. The Black Day is another oddity of Michigan weather. And if that is what you truly seek, then this episode is definitely for you. For the most part, it still defies logical explanation today, and it is, as I said, known as Black Day or Dies Infantis, which in Latin means unlucky day, and the unlucky day took place on November 8th, 1819. Early on this morning, green clouds began to thicken to inky blackness over the Saginaw Valley. By noon, it became as black as night outside, and there was general panic. It was not long and rain began pouring down, but the rain was very unusual, making a grayish foam as it hit the earth. The water that came down looked like soap suds and left a greasy-like deposit over everything. By the late afternoon, there came a little and short-lived clearing. This was only a false calm, rather like bat in the eye of a hurricane, so to speak. Soon the clouds began to thicken again, and then, with a blast of intense lightning, the clouds seemed to open up, showing a fiery furnace inside. What a horribly awesome sight that must have been. That opening lasted for a period of an hour, and all the while thunder rolled continuously. It was said to have shaken the territory all around. Even the Indians in Canada were upset over the terrible rumbling. Within a month after this, the Indians signed a treaty with Governor Cass, selling their lands. They looked upon the Black Day as anger of the Great Spirit Gitchimanitu for their misdeed in giving up their homelands. Possible explanations for the events have been offered, but none seem to fit the entire scenario. It has been speculated that a distant forest fire might have caused soot to fall in the rain, causing the grayish foam, and that's possible. Sure, but what about the tremendous thunder which shook the entire territory? Some say it was an earthquake, and this too is possible. Sure, but quite a twist of fate for the forest fire and earthquake to take place at the same time, that their effects would be felt at the same time, but still possible. But what about the strange furnace-like opening in the clouds, which lasted for the period of an hour? I have never heard anyone offer up any explanation for that, and this does appear to be one of the more unusual storms in the annals of Michigan weather. Now, sometimes the storms come suddenly. As I said in the beginning, Michigan's weather is very changeable. Storms come up often without any warning and with little advance notice. The Indians of the Great Lakes had an explanation for the sudden storms which come up upon the Great Lakes. They believed there was an enormous mountain lion that lived under the lakes, and his name was Mishipishu. He was said to be very evil and could only be fought off by Anamiki, the powerful thunderbird. They believed it was the swift movement of the mountain lion's tail that caused the sudden and violent storms on the lakes. Now, I'm sure we all have a storm story we could tell, but since this is my video, I'll share one with you. It was October 24th, 2001, and I was working for WKNX Radio in Bridgeport, Michigan. It was a very hot and humid fall day, in fact, untypically so. It was late afternoon, and I was getting ready to leave for the day. My stepson, David, was with me. As we were ready to walk out, a tornado watch was issued that changed to a warning. You could hear the sirens from the fire department sounding the warning loudly. And as we looked out the door, we saw, as above, gray clouds gathering, but it did not lightning frequently. But it didn't lightning frequently. But it didn't look that bad. I had noted the time was about 4:15. In a short 15 minutes, the clouds had changed and were looking angry and troubled. Thunder rumbled and lightning flashed and rain began to fall in torrents. By 4:25, my stomach was churning with anxiety, and David, well, I had all I could do to keep him inside. You see, the weather fascinates him. By 4:25, a wall of clouds descended, and the wind was wild with gusts. The entire mass seemed to begin to slowly spin, and I thought that was it. I was going to be in my first tornado. David was hopeful. He would have loved that storm that carried Dorothy off to Oz. For my part, severe storms had scared me ever since I was a kid growing up on Shreve Drive, only a few miles away. However, there's something strangely fascinating about an event of this magnitude. A few moments later, the hail began to pelt down, and except for the thunder and lightning, things seemed to become strangely calm. It was 4:30, and the sky became inky black. The sirens were still sounding the alarm, and Rick Allen, a DJ at WKNX, suggested we go down to the basement. David would not hear of it, and so from the doorway facing the transmission towers, we watched, and I took pictures. Well, lightning was frequently hitting the towers like savage spears. Rick returned to the studio and began to give complete details over the air as he repeated the warning. The winds again began to gust very strong, though the hail had stopped. Still, the rain seemed almost torrential. We were to be spared, though, because the storm soon weakened as quickly as it had appeared. The ominous-looking clouds that seemed to come down and touch the ground lifted back into the main mass. The hot air became cool and refreshing, and the black angry clouds gave way to the more pensive-looking gray ones. And then, by 5 o'clock, it was all over, but one of the more memorable weather events.
my life.